Out front now, Mark Short. He's the former Director of Legislative Affairs at the White House. Mark, thanks very much for taking the time tonight.
Jim, thanks for having me on.
So Mark, when you look at both the Woodward book and you look at the New York Times op-ed, there is one consistent message here, and that is people working closely with the president who are concerned about the president's leadership, dysfunction in the White House. Let me just ask you straight up. You worked in the White House for months. Did you witness any of this dysfunction when you were there?
Jim, there's no doubt that this White House operates different than previous, and for a lot of people in Washington, D.C., that's very unsettling and disconcerting. But if you look at what the record of achievements are, not just on the economy, also the president's promises that have been delivered, from moving the embassy in Jerusalem to making assurances on Iran, as well as what he's done on the regulatory front, a huge Supreme Court vote coming up. This administration has enormous achievements. And at some point, I think that many people covering the White House need to recognize what's been accomplished. And often we're sitting here focusing on the process and the drama and what's happening inside. There's no doubt the American people elected President Trump because he operates a different style. And that's what they wanted.
To be clear, we're not talking about meaningless drama here. If you read the Woodward book or even just excerpts from it, and this currently serving official in the administration, they talk about a lack of interest in the issues, a lack of understanding of the issues, particularly on national security. There's a story in there about a tweet the president wanted to put out that his own advisor said that could start a war because North Korea might interpret that as an act of war. I mean, that's not just meaningless drama. That is dysfunction with consequence.
Jim, I think you look at the national security team that surrounds the president with Ambassador Bolton, Secretary Pompeo, Secretary Mattis. It's one of the strongest national security teams our country's ever had. And I think that you look at the record of achievement there and the fact that we've reclaimed 99% of the territory that ISIS had when Donald Trump became president. You look at the progress I believe we're making in North Korea. I think there's a lot that American people can be excited about and pleased with. So, again, I think that we need to look at what the record is and what's happening.
Well, I will ask you to cite what progress, concrete progress you would attribute to North Korea. But let's look at the numbers, because there is a problem. CNN had a new poll today in how the American people perceive this. President's approval rating, 36%, down significantly. The unfavorable rating, the highest in CNN's polling, 61%. But look at these other numbers. Only 32% of the country rate him as honest and trustworthy. 32% proud that he's president. 36% believe that he cares about people like themselves. 30% believe he will unite the country. 37% believe he respects the rule of law. Why, if these are unsubstantiated claims, as you're saying, and if you're saying that this is the kind of president Americans elected, why do those numbers show such a lack of confidence in this president?
Well, there's no doubt that the country is divided on many fronts right now, Jim, but I also think that the president faces an unparalleled amount of negative coverage from the mainstream media. I think that certainly impacts what that polling shows. But again, I think that the president and Republicans in Congress have a tremendous record to run on. And I do think that I understand the frustration that many in the White House feel with the book and with the op-ed, but the best the administration can do to focus on their achievements, on new numbers just out Friday, not just on 4.2% GDP, but for the last year when people talk about the record unemployment, Democrats have said, but there's no wage increase. And now you say the 2.9% wage increase announced on Friday is the most in 10 years since the recession started. So there's so much positive news that the administration can be talking about. Also, on Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation, 2 Supreme Court justices in 2 years is a real mark that the president's leaving on the Supreme Court. But that's where I think we should be focused.
I have to ask you, Mark, and I know you're not the only one to use this talking point, that if only the president got better coverage, everybody would see his great successes here. But let's be frank, the president creates his own coverage, does he not? He's often speaking directly to the American people via his Twitter feed. For instance, you look at that number there, 37% believe he respects the rule of law. Perhaps they're reading his tweets attacking the Department of Justice, the FBI, or making comments about trials that are underway, as he did with Manafort, as he has with 2 Republican congressmen now accused of financial crimes. Is that the mainstream media coverage that's responsible for the American people reacting to those very public comments by this president?
Jim, there's no doubt the president's found a way to, in his view, bypass the mainstream media with his social media accounts. And I think he's able to communicate with the American people. And I think that he'd probably be one to acknowledge sometimes that he gets it wrong there. But at the same time, in many cases, I think the genesis of using that vehicle is he feels he's not going to get a fair shake in the mainstream media.
Listen, on this issue, because it's been interesting to watch a number of administration officials issue public denials that they were behind this op-ed, including the vice president, who was willing. He said he'd be willing to take a lie detector to do this. Why do you think the vice president believes he has to say that in public, that he'd be willing? Is he perhaps indicating that the president suspects that he might be the person behind this?
No, I don't think the president suspects that at all. The vice president's been incredibly loyal and trustworthy to the president. I think that the vice president's responding to some accusations in media or suspicion who said he could be the source of it. But again, at the end of the day, I do think that the White House should pivot and stop and just move on and recognize that whoever wrote this op-ed wants to be outed. They wouldn't go to the New York Times unless they did. And if their purpose was really to try to go against the president's will, then the best thing they could do is be quiet. The fact that they came public knows they want to come out and they want to be outed at some point. They should continue to talk about their successes at this point.
Let me ask you this, because the president has asked his Justice Department to investigate the op-ed writer for possibly committing a crime, and you heard Sarah Sanders from the White House podium today leave that possibility open. Do you believe that a person who wrote an op-ed like that, in light of the First Amendment, committed a crime?
I think it's incredibly arrogant of anybody inside an administration to believe that a duly elected president of the United States, they have more willingness to go against the will of the American people. And so I find that incredibly offensive. Having said that, I again think that the administration should focus less on this, instead should focus on its accomplishments. And no, I don't think there should be an effort to ask the Justice Department to search it.
Mark Short, thanks very much for taking the hard questions.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me.